Welcome to the EZCODE Projects Series Maze video number 8. If you have not done so already, please complete the previous EZCODE Projects Maze series videos. For those of you that have done so, let's begin. In the last video, we completed the maze logic for the Eller's algorithm. Applause, we did it. Now in this video, we'll review the code we wrote and make changes to clean it up. Remember, just type as I do. Pause the video or slow down the speed when needed. Understanding comes later. Let's begin. Open the maze project directory in VS Code. I opened up VS Code, the Explorer window, open folder. We'll find our projects, EZCODE maze, there it is, and we'll open. Now my code.js is already open to the right. If yours isn't, please open that. Now, out of all the videos we've completed in the maze series, I would say this is the most important one, or at least this video and the next one. Refactoring code forces us to understand what we did and ask why did we do it that way. Refactoring all your projects will drastically improve your programming ability. We are going to make major changes to our code base, so it's a good idea to back up our working maze file. So let's do that right now. We're going to make a copy of the code.js file. We're just going to go over here, we'll right click on the file, and we'll just say copy, and then click on source, paste, and then it already says code copy, but we're going to go in there and we're going to rename it, and we shall rename it code. Let's see, I'm just going to go back here. I'm going to go underscore, so code underscore backup, and then press enter. And I'm going to close this because we don't want to do work inside of this tab now. Let's not touch that file. We're going to just touch the code.js file. So this way, we always have the original code. We can always rename it. Just understand that we're loading the code.js file via the view HTML file. So if you ever want to load the backup, you have to change this portion right here or change your file here back to its original, or copy paste your code back into code.js. Lots of different ways to do this, but we know we have it, and let's not touch the code back up. So with the code.js file open, let's begin. So we can start just kind of at the load function, almost at the top of the file, but let's just start right here at the load function, and let's look at this first line. Even before we get to this first line, what we're doing right now is we're going to imagine. And when we're imagining, we can make up anything we wish. And there are no boundaries to what we can do with this code. There's no good ways, bad ways. We're just going to go through and experiment. And if we change it and it works, then it's good. Do it. Now, let's examine the first line. So we have document, which is provided to us. So that's a global that's given to us outside of this file by the browser when it loads the file. So we can't just go in there and say butter get element by ID or something like that. We have to call document. So we're kind of limited as to what we can do here. And we do have a string value here, and a good idea is to kind of do what we did before. We made constants at the top that contained our string, and then we used the constant we created all through the file. That way, if we wanted to change it from 30px to 40, we only have to do it in one place. This is always a good idea to do. And the same can be said for most of the string values that are in our file here. So view container, all right, we could put that on something else. And we could move it out somewhere anyways. And since we're imagining, what about shrinking the document get element by ID method name? Now, as I said before, we can't change the HTML and that the browser gives us, the code that the browser, hey, this is what it is. Or can we? What if we had our own helper library? We could import it into our file and just get to the point. Maybe we don't want to use getElementById. We already know it's the ID. So let's say instead of getElementId, we just called our own library method. We could call our library something cool, like maybe we'll call it HTML_X, or new modern HTML, or HTML_maximum, or HTML max, or really when we're typing, we want to just get to the point. What if instead we just had a library and the same line could be said doing something like this? We're going to call a library, instead of HTML max, we're just going to call it max. And the method we have to get element by ID, we're just going to say get. Just get to the point. And then we're going to contain all our values, or our string values, in an object that we're going to call value. And the value for here is going to be the container. See if I spelled that right, with a semicolon. Now we get a little bit, right to the point. Max get value container instead of document, get element ID. And for some reason, if we wanted to use, let's say, a different type of browser or something that didn't have document, it had something else, well, our library code here wouldn't change. We would just have to go to our library and change how we're producing this item. Now, we're still not the ones producing it. The document getElementId is going to be the one that gives us our view still, but we're going to hide it behind our own code, our own method. So at least the string, reduce the length here of reading it. It's a little bit easier on the eyes, and I like to uppercase some of my constants the way, you can see this. The library's uppercase, the method's lowercase, however you want to do it. Now, it's pretty much to the point. And how could we extend this new library? What else could we do? What about the next line? How could we imagine that one? So we have something similar. It's create element, and we're doing div. I mean, if we looked at the way we did the library code here, wouldn't it be something similar? So couldn't we just do constant maze, and we're going to ask our library once again, let's say, instead we're just going to say max make, and then we're going to take, hey, what are you going to make? Well, it's going to be, again, it's going to be a div, but we don't have to put the string value. We can just put our name for the string value. And once again, I mean, look how easy it is to use our library. And we haven't even created it yet. So what about setting styles? That's kind of the next line here. We got a couple lines of code here. Let's see. Wouldn't it be easier to just set one item that has all the required styles, like we would if we were using the CSS style sheet? Well, let's see what we can imagine here. So instead of getting maze.style twice, what if we just said maze, and I'm just going to make up a method name here, and we'll go over why I'm doing it this way in a little bit, but let's just say it's just set. And instead of value, because this is a group of different items, so maybe we'll call this is our CSS object, and we'll say the CSS object has, when we call flex column, it'll just do this for us. And a little semicolon here. Now, what's the next thing we got going on here? We've already kind of taken care of this. In fact, we'll comment it out. We'll comment this out and this here. And now we can really see what we're doing here. Terse code, max get value container, max make value div, maze, set, CSS flex column. And what about this here? We have an append child. So what are we going to do with that one? We're using append child, and we are using both append and append child. Actually, we have two different calls. We have the append child here, and later in the code, if you recall, somewhere down here, we're using append. Yeah, very similar types of things, but what if our library just determined that for us? So instead, we could just say view, and then we'll do the $ again there, and we just say, look, view add maze, right to the point. Just do it. Here's the maze. You figure it out. So just to remind you that none of these items exist yet. We're just writing code we wished existed. I find that first creating what I want will more easily show me what I need. So if you haven't done so already, go ahead and type all these out. Pause the video, or however you'd like to slow it down. I'm just going to get rid of all these things here, the comments, and you should be left with something just like this, because the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create this library and bring it into the world. So let's go make our library a reality. So in the Explorer pane to the left in our maze directory, let's right-click on the source file, this one right here, and select New File. So I'll go ahead, here's my new file, and I'm going to go ahead and label it right now, and let's call it, well, let's get into it. There we go, library.js. And just hit enter, and there's our library.js. If it hasn't opened to the right, go ahead and open it. Now, if you recall from the EZCODE setup series, we need to load that new file using the view HTML, just like we're loading the code.js file. So in the view HTML, let's add the following script tag. So I'm going to open up view HTML here, and right here, we're going to just copy paste it, and then if you haven't figured it out already, let's go and just change code.js. So code, actually let's leave that one there, and we'll go to the top one here. And that's because we want to build the library before we build the code.js file. So the top one's going to be library.js, and then we're going to load the code.js. And now don't forget, we have an unsaved file here, so let's go ahead and save it. And we're going to close the view HTML, and what we should have left, if you can do it, is the library.js file. We're going to open that up, and let's go back to the code.js file for a second here. Now let's see, we have that one open, but actually we've done the work here. So let's get back to the library.js, and what were some of the items we created with our imagination? So if you remember, we had the max, the CSS, and the value. So those were all global objects, just like we created EZCODE, the EZCODE library. Actually, let's go back there again, bouncing back and forth. Just like this, right? This gave it to the global scope. There's an EZCODE global function that is in the browser when we load this. So we had value, if you remember, we had CSS, and we had max. So wouldn't we kind of do something very similar to this? In fact, it is going to be exactly like that. So we're going to go in here and we're going to create all three, and we're just going to say const, and that's our global. We're going to add, and we're going to do an IIFE, which is immediately invoked function. And just to do that again, you start with the parentheses, put the function inside of it, give it its parentheses, and then what we're going to do is just enter, curly braces, and enter again. And so we can kind of see what's going on here. But to invoke this function, we have to call one more time parentheses semicolon. So just make sure all your syntax looks like this, exactly like this. And then inside of this, we're going to return an object. Nice, simple, plain JavaScript vanilla object. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make 3 of these. So if you want, you can just copy paste these. And we'll go to the bottom here and we'll just do this 3 times. And we'll go to, of course, we have a problem here with the names. So instead of max here, we're going to do, you guessed it, CSS. And then right below line 15, we're going to do, oops, not mean to do that there. Don't save it. We're going to do value. So that's how we're calling these things. So when this function, immediately when this file loads, it's going to run these functions, each one of them, and the functions are going to do whatever work we put inside of here, and then they're going to return this object. So whatever is inside of this, and once again, the only things inside of objects are key value pairs. So you'll see what we're going to do with that here in a minute. And let's go ahead. Now, let's see. We can actually go ahead and start putting some things in, because if you remember, we actually did have a few things that we imagined. There was value container, div, flex column. So let's go ahead and make that a reality. So we'll go to the first one. We'll go to value. And we'll make this one, what was it now? We said there was a div, so that's the key, colon, and then we're going to have the string, that the value of what we were going to have inside of that. So 1 second here. So we have the div, and the next one was container, and that was view container. So we had that string value. So we make sure we spelled that one right. And then, let's see, what else did we have? We had 2 methods on the max library. And so if we went up to there and we said, okay, well, how do we add a method to an object like this? Well, we just call the key. So it was max.get. So here's our key, get. And now we just have to add a function. So we could just do this. We'll just go and do a normal arrow function. So an arrow function is, let's do a normal one right here first. Now we could do this. There, we've just added a function. That's all we have to do to add the function. We can pass something in and it does nothing. In the shorthand syntax of that is just using the arrow function like this. And then we would just go in here and open this up like that. And I'm just going to move these over here a little bit. Oops. Highlighted too much. Let's just put them like that. So just to show that was the arrow function. Now there is some differences between the arrow function and a function using it this way, but we won't get into that because we're not going to run into that issue. So what did we do? We're just making a wrapper around what was there. If you remember, it was get element by ID. So if we go back in here, now we could just say return document get element by ID, and now we don't have to put the view container in here as a string because we're passing in what we labeled as ID or butter or whatever we wanted to call it. It just makes sense to say, hey, it's an ID, because that's what we're doing. So if we put the ID over here, now we're just making a wrapper. Now the max.get will return the document get element by ID. Pretty straightforward and simple. And can you guess how we would make the make method? So we also had one more on here, and that was max make div. So how do we do that? So looking at this, we can just go here and say next key value pair. The key is going to be make, and once again we're going to do an arrow function. And this time, what are we going to call the argument that comes in? So we know it's going to be document.createElement. So we could put element. I'm just going to put type for now because we know, hey, what's the type? It's what's going to be created. So let's return document, and we're going to say create element. and we're just going to say, you know, what type was it with the semicolon. So you can see this is very straightforward and simple. It didn't take much to do this. It hid a lot of the code that we don't really have to mess with. And let's say, for example, something did change here. All of a sudden, all the browsers said, we're not doing create element ID anymore. We're going to say instead it's document create. Oops, it wants to autocomplete for me. Don't want to autocomplete. And we're going to do it like this, create element. And they changed that. Well, all we'd have to do is come in here and change our library code. Any code that was written, if we made 3,000 or 4,000 different maze generators, we wouldn't have to change anything there because it's still going to return based on our function names. So what was the last bit we had in there? And that was we need a CSS key value for flex column. So that one's a bit different. Same object, and we said, okay, we're going to call flex. So we just made this up. And we said flex column, and we're just going to make another object, a nested object inside of here, and we're going to say, now this has to be what CSS would expect. So we take the properties that we had. It was display, and it was flex, if you recall that, and then the next one was flex direction, and then it was column. So now in a way, we've made an object out of the styles that we want. So this is, if you could imagine, this is just a CSS class, and we can apply as many items as we wanted to make this thing happen. So as for the set and add methods, those were the next two. If you remember, those were $set and $add. Those are methods on the element that is returned by our make and get. So document get element by ID. This is going to return an HTML element. If you remember from our maze, we've changed our code so I can't load it, but if you remember the console logs, and you'd see in the array there was a div, and in that div there was many properties that we could look at. We don't have control over this, and just like the global scope, but we can add to it. So now, if we were in programming for a professional company, we would most likely not extend the actual HTML elements this way. But for our maze project, we are allowed to imagine, play, and discover programming. One of the reasons as to why we would not do this is because we may create a naming collision with the browser API. Remember that our library items, max, CSS, and value, will be in the global scope to the browser, and we must avoid naming collisions on the global scope. And for now, there's nothing on the global scope that says we can't add max, CSS, and value. But the thing is, the functions we add to the HTML elements, they will also need a way to mitigate naming collisions. This is why we added the $sign. Adding a $sign will lower the probability we'll run into an issue with our maze project. So to add methods to the element, we'll have to add them in the returned object of our make function. That's going to make sense here just in a second. So let's go to our make function, and we can see we're returning the element. We have no access to it. We're just immediately returning it. So instead, let's delete our return here and make a const with an element equals document create element. And now we have a hook. We can say, hey, element, let's add something to you. Now, if we did element dot, it's just an object, and we can add any key that we want to. And so in this case, we're going to add the key set. And just like our objects here, we're going to say equals. Now, in this case, we're not going to use the arrow function. And this is because what I noted up here. By using an actual function here, and then we're going to say, what are we going to pass into our function to set? Well, we're going to pass in the styles we need to set. And we're going to open up this function. Now, in this function, what we're going to do is we're going to do a for loop over the styles. So this has to be an array, or an object, I should say. It's going to be this right here. This is what's going to get passed in. and we're going to do a for loop over an object. And to do that, we're just going to say for, and we're going to create a variable. So we're using the reserve keyword let to say, hey, the following is a variable name. The variable name we're going to say is key. It could be butter or whatever you want to call it, but it's going to be key. Just makes sense because that's what we're talking about. And we're going to say let key in styles. So styles is the object, so let key in styles. So each one of these things, it's going to be the key. And what we're going to do here is open up a for loop. It's got its own little brackets too. And we're going to use a reserved word called this. And to get this, the function is going to look for what it's been applied to. So in this case, it's going to be this at runtime is going to be the element. And if we used an arrow function, it would point to the window of the browser, which is not what we want. So if you get a minute, go ahead and put an arrow function here and see what this turns into. You can also do it this way to see what this is going to be. So as we're going through this, we're going to say this, and on this, on the element, now we're going to do what we did in the code base. We called style, and it has its own method called set property. And the set property would be, just as you might understand, it'd be display, let's say if it was this one. And the second argument in there is the value. Now, we're not going to hard code something like that in here. I just wanted you to know what it looked like so that we can say we're passing in the key and then of the style object. So it would be something like this, style dot and the key. In this case, let's just say, if it was display. Now, we don't know what it's going to be, so we have to use it this way. We have to do the array brackets to call an unknown on there, and we're going to say key. So we'll say, look, this object key, give us the value. So that's the same way of saying, if I had this flex column as an object, let's just say I had that, it would be flex column dot display. And what's it going to give us if I said that? It's going to give us the value, flex. So that's what's going on here. Now we can iterate through an object and we can just keep adding as many styles as we want, and it's going to apply them to our element. So that's pretty good for some dynamic content. Now we need to add the add method. If you remember the $add, and we were going to do something here right below here. We're going to say, okay, same type of thing. We're going to say add equals function, and what are we passing in? We're passing in the elements that we want to append to this element. So just like we're doing view append child, we had view append child, and we had view append, which was just down here. So we're going to take care of both of these. And remember, with append, the difference was append can take many different elements, which we're expanding here with the spread operator, and append child can only take one. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some tricksies here, and we're going to say, okay, well, look, this as in element append, and we're going to spread, and now we're going to do a parentheses because we're going to do our own little work in here. This gets a little bit too helpful sometimes. So just real quick, I'm going to put the semicolon over here before we start expanding this. Inside this parentheses is going to be where our work goes. And we're going to ask a question. We're going to say, hey, elements, what if you're not an array? So if we, in the case of append child, it can only append one thing. So it's not going to get an array. It's going to get one element. So we can use the array class, and it has a method called isArray, and we can ask, hey, is the elements an array? And then we're going to, right here after it, space, and we're going to do a normal ternary. We're going to say, okay, if that's true, the true value goes after the question mark. If it's already an array, great. You get to go to the spread operator. But if you're not, then you're just a single element. In that case, we're just going to wrap you in a array for you. In either case, the spread operator is always going to get an array. It's either going to be an array with one element or an array with one or more elements inside of it. So we don't have to use append child. We can just use append. Just a shortcut to get through this. Now, we did the make. We said make the element. We added a couple methods to it. And the last thing we need to do is just like we did here. We have to go down here and we have to return this new shiny element that our Max library created. So let's see, we got to get the methods, and we now notice that we added both set and add methods to the returned element for make, but the returned element for get method also needs those methods. So we could just copy them there as well, but what if we made a slight change here? We'd have to make a slight change up here as well. So we would duplicate code where we really don't need to. We just need to have maybe its own generator or something like that. So let's use a special function called a closure. And to do that, you're going to see what that does here in a minute. We're going to go down here and we're going to go below. We're just going to go below everything down here, out of the way. And we're going to create a function, our own unique function, and we're going to call it create add. And the function's going to take an element, all right? And then we're going to open this up. Now, the only trick to a closure is a closure always returns another function. So we could say function, and there's a closure, done, nothing fancy. This will send to this. Now, there's not anything helpful in here, but if we wanted to, we could put a return in here and say element. Now, this function didn't get any arguments, and yet it's still going to return this element. And that's one of the beauties of using a closure, is we can pass it in here, and then we can reference it anywhere in our new function. So we're just going to do an arrow function, though. We're going to go back and we're going to say, give us this, and we're going to put in our styles, arrow function, open it up to the curly braces, and here we're just going to do our for loop. So let's just go back up here, and we're going to take this out. Let's cut it out, and we'll put it down here, and just clean it up a little bit. Now, what are we doing? We're returning a function that looks exactly like our other function. This one looks exactly like this one. Here's our function. The only difference is, and it has the styles, is it's going to capture this element. And what are we doing with this element? You can see it's grayed out right now because we didn't use it. And that's because now this is going to change. We're not going to just say, hey, whatever the runtime is. We're going to say, whatever element was passed in, that's what's going to be used here. So if it's the make function, it's the make element. If it's the get element, it's the get element. So we're just going to do the same thing here. We're just going to do a quick, we're going to copy this. Oops, we're going to go right below it. And we're going to say create set. All right, so our set one, which one did I do? I did the wrong one here. This one actually should be set. So just make this correction in yours as well. This is create set. Maybe you had already done that, but create add, that's the one we wanted. And this one is still going to be element. This is going to be element as well. But the function in here for add is going to be slightly different. If you remember, we passed in elements. And then let's just get rid of this. And let's copy paste in our create add, which was right up here. Now we're just gonna gut it, put it down here. Okay, this is getting, there we go. And then let's just get rid of the this, and we'll say element. So don't confuse element for elements. And now let's see, we have our create add. Now we have the same thing. We're capturing the element that comes in. We're returning a function that takes an elements array and then goes through its logic. So now let's add the method to our builders, to our make and get functions. Once again, if you don't have this typed out yet, just pause it when you need to and type out the information. And here, all we have to do is, let's just get rid of this. And now, all we have to do is call our new magic, let's see, it is set, I got that right. And then we're just gonna pass in the element. So we're gonna do the same thing down here. But this one's gonna be create add, and we're gonna pass in the element. Oops, let's just get over here and put the semicolon, and we'll get rid of this right here. So now we can pretty much copy paste here. Let's just grab those, and we're going to go up to our get, and we're going to open that up and paste. That was the wrong paste buffer there. Let's get this again. We're going to go boom, boom, and we'll stick them up here. Get rid of this line. Okay, so now we have what we're looking for, except we just have to get rid of the return statement, and we're going to say element equals document get element by ID. Becomes the element of the DOM. The element set, we set a method, create set, capture the element. This is going to return the function. Same thing here is going to happen, and then we just have to have, of course, the return of the element. So we can see that it's quite powerful to add new functionality to elements in the DOM in the browser. And all we have to do is just add them in a way that doesn't collide with something else. So let's review our code and make sure we didn't miss anything. I have document get element ID, the sets, I got these right? Set and add, and then return the element. Element document, we're creating it now, and we're adding to it the same thing. I got set and add, that's right. And then down here we have our, let's see, create set, that seems to be right, in styles, element.style. And then I can see one thing right here. So I said style, but we need to call it from the styles array. So this needs to be an S. It needs to be this. We pass in an, not an array, but an object. There it is again, and there it is again. So I needed an S on that one. So make sure you make that adjustment as well. And then let's see. Now we can save our work. So we're going to go ahead, after reviewing, we're going to save the library here. We're going to go to the code.js file, and right to the top here where we were. This all looks good. We're going to save this work. And let's go load the view HTML file. So let's get rid of that there. Open up the browser. And there it is. We're going to get the file, open file, find where your project is, source view HTML, and we're going to click open. And in this case, we get a maze. I'm just going to inspect over here, and let's open that up a little bit. Most likely we didn't have any errors because it ran. So as long as you don't have any errors here, if you do, go back and revisit your code, look at the review the video and see if you missed something. And let's see. Our refactor so far is working. So nice work, everyone. We went over some complex ideas. And when you have time, and if you have backed up your work, go ahead and pick apart the code to better understand what is going on. In the next video, we'll continue our refactoring by applying our new Shiny library to other parts of our code. If you've enjoyed this video, click like and then subscribe buttons to get notifications of new content. Thank you for exploring programming with me, and I'll see you in the next video.